The sun fell lazily over the mountains that morning, spilling across the marble temples and ash-streaked altars of Lydia like golden wine. The breeze was mild, laced with olive oil, dust, and the perfume of withering laurels. Birds called out like heralds from fig branches, and children chased shadows across the uneven flagstones of Sardis, the great capital, laughing in that high, thin voice that only those too young to understand fear can sustain. Somewhere deep within the city's tangled ribs, between silk merchants with stiff backs and fish wives with louder voices, she was waking. Crisis. That had not always been her name. Once, she was Dion, daughter of a grain merchant with soft hands and a mother who sang under her breath while stirring lentils in clay pots. She had known the smell of barley and warm goat's milk and the feeling of earth under bare feet when she ran through fields with her brother, back before death and beauty and sacrifice had learned her name. But now, she was Crisis. The Golden One. She didn't choose the name. It had been given to her, with heavy garlands and heavier intentions. And as she pulled the silk shawl tighter across her shoulders that morning, sitting at the edge of her raised sleeping couch, she could hear the rustling of the priest's sandals echoing in the hallway just outside. Polished leather. Sandals that never scuffed. Sandals that always walked on marble. Do not speak unless the oracle permits it, one had warned her yesterday. And do not step outside the sacred chamber before first bathing in saffron. She had obeyed. As always. She didn't even miss her voice anymore. The sacred chamber of the Temple of Cybele was not meant to house mortals. Not really. It was high, vaulted, and cold despite the golden torchlight that flickered against its silver inlays. The floor was a puzzle of stone and mother of pearl. The walls were carved with scenes too old for anyone to remember but too holy to be forgotten. A woman giving birth to flame. A man devoured by birds with human faces. A procession of veiled figures pouring molten gold into the mouth of an urn. Crisis walked slowly into the chamber, her every step timed to the distant drumbeat that echoed from the subterranean sanctum beneath the temple. It was a rhythm older than her people, older than the gods they worshipped now. And it meant only one thing: tonight the goddess would be fed. Fed, as she had always been. Fed, as she demanded. With something more sacred than bread, more costly than wine. The high priest, old Menocrates, stood by the altar. He wore the skin of a snow-white lamb over his head and shoulders, though blood still rimmed the edges of its jaw. His eyes were rimmed with kohl, and his lips glistened with resin. He smiled at her, warmly, even, and gestured toward the bronze platform at the center of the floor. "Lie back, daughter of gold," he said, "and the heavens will look upon you." She did not speak. She climbed the steps, lay down, and closed her eyes. She imagined barley fields. Her brother's laugh. Her mother's song. She did not cry. Not yet. The ritual took hours. Not that anyone called it that, of course. The Ascension. They named it, and to hear them describe it, you'd think it was a privilege unmatched, a glorious transmutation from flesh to eternity. You'd think the pain would be irrelevant. You'd think Crisis would be grateful. But pain was never irrelevant. Not even to the gods. First, the oils. Her entire body was washed in fragrant myrrh, spikenard, and warm honey wine, poured slowly from embossed jugs held by silent virgins in deep blue robes. Their hands were firm and methodical. Not cruel, exactly, but practiced. This was not their first offering. Nor would it be the last. Then the powders, chalk dust mixed with crushed pearl and flecks of silver, brushed across her skin in swirling patterns that mapped stars she would never see again. And then came the gold. Gold in the form of heated resin, mixed with fine flakes of the sacred or mined from the Pactolus River, where King Midas had once swept away his curse. Irony, perhaps, that the same river now provided the material for this new blessing, this divine embodiment. It was painted on her skin with slow, deliberate strokes. Each stroke seared. Each sear left no scream, because she had been forbidden to make sound. The chamber fell silent, except for the lapping of flames and the steady hiss of hot gold touching skin. Menocrates chanted, "Let the vessel be made divine," the others repeated. Let the vessel be made divine. She closed her eyes, and in her mind, her mother was still stirring lentils. Elsewhere in the city, the world went on. A peddler argued over the price of garlic. A young couple kissed beneath a fig tree, their hands still dusty with bread flour. A cat gave birth in an alley near the east gate, while a boy with a wooden sword practiced killing imaginary raiders beside the well. No one knew what was happening inside the temple. Or rather, they knew, in the way one knows that the sea exists though they have never touched it. In the way old men mutter about eclipses and comets and signs from the gods. In the way fear sits like sediment at the bottom of everyone's thoughts, never quite stirred, but never settled. They knew there was a girl inside. They knew she was being gilded. And they knew she would not leave. But knowing is not understanding. And so they lived, breathed, slept, as if the gods weren't watching. By dusk, Chrysis could no longer feel her legs. Her skin shimmered with a golden sheen now, every inch of it covered in the sacred metal. Only her eyes remained untouched. Her lips had been painted closed, her lashes brushed with powdered amber. She lay still, unable to move. The metal had hardened, and where it cracked with her breath, the priest came to repair it with new layers. She was a statue. She was the statue. She would be placed at the temple's entrance at dawn. And then, well, then the waiting would begin. You see, this was not just a display. It was a test. A trial. A worship. She would remain on that pedestal, unblinking, unmoving, unfed, untouched, until she passed into death. And when that happened, when her eyes stopped twitching, when her breath finally ceased and the gold became her tomb, they would say the goddess had accepted the offering. They would cheer. They would weep. And another girl would be chosen. Just as Chrysis had been. Just as the one before her had been. Just as the city demanded. But here's the part no one told. Chrysis was still thinking. Her mind, trapped in that gilded shell, still moved like a bird in a cage. She remembered the goat's milk. The barley fields. Her brother's muddy footprints on the stone steps. She remembered being Dion. And in that final twilight before dawn, as the priest lit incense and scattered dried roses over her body, she remembered a single, almost stupid detail. Her father once told her that gold does not breathe. And she wondered, in the quiet space between heartbeat and nothing, if that's why the gods love it so much. Because it cannot complain. Because it cannot resist. Because once it sets, it forgets. She closed her eyes and listened to the city breathe. The morning came not like a dawn but like a revelation. It bled slowly through the stained glass of the temple's high windows, casting fractured halos across the chamber floor, damp now with wax, perfume, and old prayers. Outside, the city had begun to stir. Sardis, ever-proud jewel of Lydia, shook off the night with the arrogant grace of a lion stretching its limbs. And yet within the temple, time moved differently. The priestesses sang. Low, droning, and ancient, a song in a tongue that had not been spoken in daily life for 500 years. Their voices twined like smoke, forming harmonies that rose and fell like waves against the marble walls. Chrysis, silent, sealed, and shining, lay motionless beneath the arch of the sanctum, her body gleaming with fresh gold in the half-light. They came to lift her then. 5 men, chosen not for their piety or wisdom, but for their steady hands. They moved like clockwork, sliding long wooden poles beneath the platform she now rested on. The gold had dried, and with it, her flesh had stiffened. The statue she had become was heavier than any of them expected, and yet none dared grunt under the weight. To strain was to blaspheme. And to drop her, to break her, was unthinkable. The procession began. Slow, rhythmic, silent. Down the long colonnade lined with painted lions and crouching bulls. Past the inner courts where sacred bees hummed between ivory blossoms. Through the Gate of Eyes, so named because of the hundreds of carved pupils watching all who passed. Outside, the city waited. It was a ceremony, yes, but also a performance. The people had come early to witness it. From potters and traders to scribes and weavers, they stood with arms crossed and brows drawn, packed along the temple avenue like reeds in the river. No one spoke. Not because they were told to be silent, but because they felt they should be. Even the children did not giggle. Even the drunkards did not heckle. Something in the air warned them, today is different. Crisis passed between them like a dream. Her golden form, naked but for the painted symbols of Cybele across her chest and thighs, gleamed under the rising sun. Her hair, once chestnut, now shimmered like plated copper beneath the gilded resin. Her lips were sealed, a thin line of metal where a girl's voice used to be. A young woman near the front of the crowd, no older than 16, touched her own throat involuntarily. She would later tell her children. Her eyes were open. I swear it. And she was looking at me. They placed her at the center of the temple steps, just above the great offering dish of bronze, where devotees cast coins, doves, and sometimes teeth. Her pedestal had been polished that morning, rubbed with pomegranate oil until it glowed like fire in the noonday sun. She stood on it like a relic, but breathing. Living, but forbidden to move. The people bowed. The high priest spoke. He called her the vessel. He called her the chosen. He said her name, Crisis, and the crowd echoed it, soft like an echo in a crypt. And then they left her. That was the way of it. There was no further ritual. No grand conclusion. No curtain to fall. Once placed, the offering was left alone. The statue watched as they returned to their lives. The priests to their scrolls. The merchants to their scales. The farmers to their fields. The children to their games. And Crisis remained. The first hours were simple. She had been trained for stillness. Weeks of fasting, of holding postures in cold water, of practicing how not to scratch when her skin itched, how not to flinch when incense smoke stung her eyes. So at first, it was only mildly uncomfortable. But by midday, the sun was no longer kind. It bore down on her with the full weight of a Lydian summer, heating the gold on her skin until it stung with every gust of wind. The pedestal beneath her radiated heat, burning her feet, which had not been padded. No one had considered the soles. She tried to think of other things. The color of river pebbles. The call of cranes in migration. The way her mother laughed while squinting at the horizon. But memory is a poor shelter from pain. By the second day, it was no longer discomfort, it was torment. Flies landed on her face and crawled across her sealed eyelids. One rested inside the curve of her nostril for an hour. Her lips, already dry and closed with resin, began to crack beneath the heat. Her eyes throbbed. Her neck burned. But she did not cry. Tears would only make the gold crack. And if the gold cracked, they would patch it. And that would be worse. People passed. Some stared in reverence, heads bowed, hands on hearts. Others only glanced up briefly before hurrying on with baskets and ledgers and gossip. A boy tossed a peach pit at her feet. A girl whispered a poem and placed a stalk of lavender near the base. And once, a nobleman spat. Right at her. Then bowed theatrically and walked off laughing with his friends. She could still smell his perfume as the sun dipped below the hills. That night, the stars emerged pale and slow. She watched them, barely, through lashes stuck with dust. Somewhere behind her, the temple chanted hymns, offering prayers that never touched her ears. Sleep never came. The body begs for it, yes, but pain does not share a bed. She wondered what day it was. She wondered how many girls had stood here before her. She wondered if any had screamed. She imagined the gold swallowing the sound before it reached the air. On the third morning, a pigeon landed on her shoulder. It cooed, defecated, flew away. Crisis did not move. Her back spasmed. Her left arm felt numb. Her throat ached in a way that thirst could never explain, an ache like something old and hollow collapsing inward. Her bladder, humiliated, released in silence sometime after noon. And still, she stood. The gold had begun to crack at the crook of her knee. That night, the priests came. They approached under cover of twilight, their footsteps muffled with strips of linen tied around their sandals. Menocrates held a bowl of molten resin mixed with fresh flakes of gold. He applied it without expression, layering it across the damaged spot like a mason sealing a wall. The heat was unbearable. Chrysis nearly passed out. But not quite. Menocrates leaned close. "Soon," he whispered. She did not blink. She could not. On the fourth day, the gods blinked. A storm rolled over the western hills with no warning. Thunder cracked like a whip, and lightning flashed along the rooftops. Rain poured down in sheets, cool, sweet, purifying. It was the first mercy she had known in days. The rain slicked the gold, softened the heat, and numbed the pain. Her eyes, barely functioning, drank in the gray sky as if it were wine. Children danced in the street below. Old women threw buckets on their rooftops to catch the gift. And Chrysis stood there, unyielding, mouth closed, weeping inside without tears. By dawn, the rain had passed. But the gold had changed. Where the water hit the fresh resin, tiny bubbles had formed. Flaws. Imperfections. She would need repair. They came earlier that day. Priestesses first, scrubbing her down, polishing her, apologizing in low whispers she could barely hear. One of them, barely older than Chrysis, lingered too long, and when no one watched, placed a tiny flower into her palm. She could not feel it. But she knew. It was there. Menocrates came again. He looked older now, somehow. His hair damp, his face drawn. "You're holding on," he murmured, almost kindly. She would have laughed, had she the mouth for it. Instead, she watched a raven land on the temple roof. Later that week, or was it only day 5, the pain changed again. It stopped being a scream and became something else. A dull roar. Like standing beneath a waterfall of fire, but so long beneath it that your skin begins to believe this is how life feels. Her vision blurred. Her fingers twitched, but not enough for anyone to notice. Inside her chest, her heart beat slower. Not dangerously slow, but slower. As if it, too, was growing tired. No one came that night. No repair. No priest. No whisper. The flower in her palm had shriveled. Its petals clung to her golden skin like ash. The city had moved on. It was near the end of that 6th day that the change finally came. It was subtle. Not dramatic. No trumpet, no divine sign. Just a single breath, shallow, slower than the rest, followed by another, and then silence. Her body froze not from effort, but from release. Her lungs stopped moving. Her eyes, dried, cloudy, stared without seeing. And the gold did what it always did. It preserved. It immortalized. It buried. A priest passing by noticed the stillness. He whispered to an acolyte. And within minutes, the bells rang out. "The goddess has accepted her." The people clapped. Some knelt. The high priest wept. And Chrysis, once Dion, stood in silence. Her death would be recorded. Her pedestal would be engraved. A new girl would be chosen. And the sun would rise, as it always did, upon a city that believed itself holy. The name Chrysis became legend before her bones had cooled. For weeks, people came to stare, to leave offerings, to whisper prayers through clenched teeth at her motionless feet. The old women brought sprigs of hyssop and salt. The soldiers left coins from foreign campaigns. The children drew her in chalk on alley walls, giving her wings or turning her into a mother, or a monster, depending on their moods. Her story twisted quickly, like smoke in a crowded room. Some said she died smiling. Some said she never died at all, that the goddess had pulled her spirit into heaven and left only the gold behind. Some swore she blinked still, when the moon was full. But mostly, people forgot. Not all at once, but slowly. Like water receding after a flood. The image remained, but the weight of it, the drowning pressure of knowing someone had died right there, in silence, in stillness, lifted. Within months, the statue had become simply part of the landscape. Just another corner of the temple, like the cracked lion at the east gate, or the incense basin that never emptied. She remained beautiful. and beauty, in time, becomes mundane. Behind closed doors, the priests argued. Crisis had lasted 6.5 days. Not a record. Not a failure. Respectable, Menocrates called it. But privately, he was concerned. The resin mix had been wrong. Too brittle, he admitted to his scribes. The heat of the summer had thinned it too quickly, made it crack before the second day. If the girl hadn't been so compliant, he wasn't sure it would have held. He blamed the rain, of course. And the assistants. He never blamed the ritual. The ritual was perfect. Always had been. Always would be. The next candidate was selected before Chrysis's name had faded from the temple records. Her name was Clea. 16. Dark-haired. Skin like olive bark and calluses on her hands from weaving. Her family was honored. Her mother wept. Her father bowed and whispered thanks through his teeth. Clea did not speak. They said that meant she was ready. But here, let us pause. Let us walk away from the temple, for just a moment. Down the winding streets of Sardis. Past the bakeries where sesame smoke lingers in the rafters. Past the dye vats where boys with red-stained feet joke about love and war. Let us step into a small house at the edge of the textile quarter, no more than a square of stone with a wooden roof. Inside, a woman is boiling lentils. Her back is crooked now. Her hair is gray. She hums softly, tunelessly. Her eyes are fixed not on the pot, but on the space beyond it, on something only she sees. This is Chrysis's mother. She has not spoken her daughter's name in a year. Not because she forgot, but because the name hurts. They told her the ritual was an honor. That Dion, no, Chrysis, had been chosen. That she should celebrate. That her child had been made into something eternal. That the city would remember her forever. And yet here she is. A woman with aching hands and no daughter. Stirring lentils for no one. In the market, people still speak of the temple statue, but not always kindly. The younger ones call it creepy. The older ones say she was the most beautiful girl ever chosen. A merchant claims he kissed her foot once when he was drunk. Another says she cured his wife's illness. He offered a ring to her shrine in thanks. But nobody remembers her voice. Or her laugh. Or the way she once ran through barley fields with her brother, her skirt hiked up in both hands, her face split in a wild grin. That's the thing about offerings. They stop being people and become symbols. And symbols are easier to admire when they stay quiet. Menocrates died in his sleep the following spring. He was found in his chambers. Mouth agape, scrolls scattered around him. The cause was never certain, old age, likely. The city mourned him for 3 days. At his funeral, a eulogy was spoken in his honor. High priest of Cybele, keeper of the flame, chosen of the sacred eye. No one mentioned Chrysis. Not directly. But as they burned his body, the statue caught the afternoon sun. And for a moment, just a blink, her face shimmered in such a way that a boy nearby screamed. He swore she was smiling. Now let us descend into the vaults. Below the temple, deeper than the public sanctuaries, there were rooms no commoner ever saw. Cold rooms. Quiet. Full of ledgers, bones, locked chests, and old gods. Here the records were kept. All of them. Including a scroll labeled Chrysis, Cycle 274. It was not long. A few lines. Her real name. Her family. The number of days she stood. The mixture ratio of the resin. Notes on her skin's reaction to gold. Excellent endurance. Someone had written. Mild cracking at day 4. Minimal vocal resistance. That was all. No poems. No praise. No memorial. Just a body turned to numbers. A girl turned to ash beneath metal. History, it turns out, is efficient. And yet, sometimes, late at night, a few claim to see her eyes move. The temple guards drink too much and make jokes. But the youngest ones, when the torches flicker and the wind howls through the columns, do not laugh. One swore he saw her lean forward. Another said her shadow shifted when no one else moved. No one believes them. But none of them dare stand near her after moonrise. Just in case. Clea lasted 4 days. She was less compliant. Less quiet. They sealed her lips early. Her death was quicker. The people cheered anyway. They said, "The goddess is satisfied." They said, "Glory to the chosen." They said, "The temple endures." But the statue of Crisis remained. And though the gold dulled with time, and birds sometimes nested beneath her arms, and her feet were slowly stained green from rain and wind and copper runoff, she never fell. She never bowed. And in the silence of her metal throat, her story did not fade. It only waited. Time passed and the world changed. Not all at once, not like fire swallowing a curtain, but like moss covering a stone. Slowly, softly, inevitably. The mighty Lydian Empire, once proud and gold-fed, bent beneath the weight of foreign boots and foreign gods. First came the Persians, with silk banners and horses that never tired. Then Alexander's men, speaking Greek like it was a weapon, rewriting the names of temples as if stone could forget its own soul. And later still, the Romans, practical, relentless, dressed in steel and discipline. But through it all, the Temple of Cybele remained. Scarred, yes. Repurposed, certainly. Once, briefly, it was used as a treasury. Then a garrison. Then a bathhouse, of all things. But always, somehow, the statue stayed. They couldn't move it. No matter who ruled, no matter how many gods were dragged in and out of favor like dancers at a banquet, the golden figure on her pedestal remained untouched. At first, they didn't dare. Later, they simply couldn't. One Roman engineer, a proud man from Capua, tried once to dislodge the pedestal. He brought a team of slaves and bronze levers, measuring the angles like he was solving a puzzle. The statue didn't budge. The next morning, his slaves were gone, vanished without a trace. Some said they fled. Others whispered that they dissolved into dust. Either way, the Capuan left without speaking, and no one tried again. And so she stayed. Her name was forgotten. Her voice never returned. But her eyes, dull now, cracked with age and rain, watched century after century roll past like clouds in a windless sky. A monk named Theon wrote about her in the 3rd century. He had stumbled upon the statue while fleeing a tax rebellion, half-starved and sleepless. His notes, scribbled in the margins of a hymnal, described a woman of shining metal, mouth sealed in lamentation, eyes like orphaned stars. He'd prayed to her that night. Not to his god. To her. And though he was later found in a fever, raving about being swallowed by a golden tomb, his writings survived, buried in the scriptorium of a monastery that would later burn to the ground. They called it madness. But he was not the last to kneel before her. Centuries blurred. Fires came. Earthquakes. Floods. Dynasties rose and fell like notes in a long, sad song. Sardis was rebuilt more than once. Each time, the streets shifted, new corners emerged, and old buildings were swallowed by dust. But even as new homes were planted atop ruins, and temples of Cybele became churches of Mary, and later mosques of conquest, the statue endured. She was no longer in the center of the city. Not even near a road. But buried, half hidden, in what had become a storage chamber beneath the foundations of a forgotten church, surrounded by discarded candle molds and collapsed beams. Only her face remained visible. Still. Watching. Waiting. In the winter of 1462, a merchant named Basilius found her. He had been chasing a rat. Truly, that was all. His goods, barrels of spice and fermented fish paste, had been raided one too many times. So he followed the sounds into the crumbling side of the ancient church, past rotted pews and a heap of bones he didn't pause to examine. And there, in the dust, he found her. He screamed, then dropped to his knees. It took 3 days for him to speak of it. When he finally did, he brought a scribe and a mason and a boy with a very fast mouth, and they returned with torches. They found the statue again. Still there. Half buried in debris. Cracked, faded, and yet unmistakable. A woman of gold, her mouth sealed, her posture straight, her eyes full of something too large for human language. Basilius knew what he had found. He believed it was a relic. The others believed it was cursed. But all agreed it should not be touched. So they built a wall. Right there, in the ruin. A false wall. Bricked it up and marked it with an X, known only to Basilius. One day, he told his son, when the world is quiet again, she will be needed. His son never told anyone. But his son's son did. And that was enough. The 19th century came dragging trains and tourists and men with hats too large for their heads. They came from Vienna, from London, from Paris. Digging, measuring, cataloging the broken teeth of history. They found the wall in 1874. A German named Wilfried Holtzmann was the first to strike it with a pickaxe. He thought it was hiding coins. He was not entirely wrong. They pulled the bricks down. The light rushed in. And there she was. Still golden. Still silent. Still watching. The scholars lost their minds. A Hellenic gilded funerary sculpture. They called it. Possibly Eastern in origin. Unparalleled preservation. Unprecedented metallurgy. They lifted her from the wreckage with cranes. Placed her in a wooden crate padded with sawdust and reverence. Shipped her to Vienna. The museum exhibition called her the Golden Maiden of Sardis. They never guessed she had a name. They never guessed she had died. In the grand hall of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, she was placed beneath vaulted ceilings and watched over by gas lamps and oil paintings. Tourists gawked. Children pointed. Scholars debated the curve of her hands, the absence of mouth movement, the strange rigidity of her joints. Clearly decorative. They said, no articulation. No internal cavity. Possibly poured. No religious significance. Said one. Perhaps a funerary idol. And someone else wrote a short paper on the possibility of her being a fertility totem. Another called her a pre-Persian automaton. None of them noticed the cracked resin near her left eye. None of them noticed it had shifted. Slightly. As if, perhaps, something beneath it had twitched. But one girl noticed. Her name was Elise. She was 11, visiting from Prague with her governess. She wandered off from the exhibit on Babylonian glass and found herself in front of the statue. She stared for 20 minutes. Said nothing. The next day, she came back. And the day after that. When her governess asked why she was so fascinated, Elise only said, "She's still alive." The woman laughed. But that night, Elise left a coin at the statue's feet. No one saw. The next morning, the coin was gone. Years passed. The world spiraled into war. The museum was bombed in 1944. Most of the western wing was destroyed. But not the chamber where Chrysis stood. She was unharmed. Not even dust on her face. The curator called it a miracle. Others called it luck. But one man, an old janitor with trembling hands and rheumy eyes, refused to sweep near her. When asked why, he said, "Because she listens." Then he quit. And never came back. By 1978, the museum had moved her to a side room. Too many people reported unease. Children crying. Dogs refusing to enter. A fire alarm that went off only when she was left in total darkness. And still, she stood. Still golden. Still watching. Still waiting. In 2003, a student from Istanbul wrote her thesis on the statue. It was the first paper to call her Chrysis. She had pieced together fragments, old temple records, burned library scrolls, oral histories from shepherds near ancient Sardis. It was speculative. Weakly sourced. Half of academia dismissed it. But in the paper's final footnote, she wrote, "If she truly lived, if she stood for 6 days, what must those final hours have felt like? Not myth. Not symbol. But flesh beneath gold. Heart beneath silence. And if she remembers, What does she remember about us? The paper was never published, but copies circulated, and one found its way back to Sardis, to a girl named Layla. Layla was 17. She lived in a concrete house near the ruins, sold figs in the summer, and worked as a night guide in the off-season. She had no gods, no prayers, but she had heard the old stories. The golden girl, the living statue, the whisperer behind stone lips. One night she crept into the ruins with a flashlight. And a question. Not for the priests. Not for the books. For her. Crisis. She placed her palm against the remaining stone of the temple wall. And whispered, "What did they take from you?" The wind stirred. The stars blinked. And though nothing moved, Layla turned away with tears running down her face. Not because she was afraid, but because she felt, in her bones, a wordless grief. Old as the city, heavy as gold, and far away, in Vienna, the statue stood alone in her glass box. The night security lights blinked, and for just 1 second, so quickly no camera caught it, the shadow behind her eyes flickered. Not an illusion, not a trick, but something waking, very slowly, from a very long sleep. Morning comes softly over Vienna, as it always has. The golden domes shimmer in pale sun, trams rattle like sleepy beetles down the quiet avenues, and pigeons swirl like gray thoughts above the waking roofs. The museum opens its doors at 10 sharp, the scent of waxed floors and old stone mixing with the faint trace of espresso from the cafe across the square. Inside, the tourists move with polite curiosity. They drift like ghosts through the marble galleries, pausing at Caravaggios, tilting their heads at ancient coins, murmuring over shattered sarcophagi and half-erased gods. And then, they find her. Crisis. The golden maiden of Sardis. She stands not in the grand hall anymore, but in a corner alcove, behind a thick pane of temperature-controlled glass. The plaque beside her is small, typed in 3 languages, and deeply incorrect. Hellenic funerary sculpture. 6th century BC. Thought to represent a priestess or goddess figure. Composition: gold leaf over unknown alloy, base of limestone. Unusual preservation of form. Donated anonymously, 1874. It does not say, "She died here." It does not say, "This was once a girl." It certainly does not say, "She remembers." But perhaps, just perhaps, those who stare long enough begin to feel it. A quiet hum, not quite in the ears. A pressure, not entirely on the chest. A question, forming behind the tongue, who sealed her mouth, and why? They stand longer than they expect to. Some say they feel watched. One man, a historian from Thessaloniki, wrote in his journal, "It's as if she knows you're lying when you think she was only art." Across the world, the threads begin to pull. Layla returns to the ruins in Sardis. She walks the fallen stones with careful steps, her flashlight beam flickering like breath over walls older than Christ. She finds the false chamber again, the one beneath the old church, where the statue once stood. It smells of cold earth and burnt salt. She doesn't speak this time. She simply kneels. And from her bag, she removes an old photo, a black and white shot of the statue in 1932, before the museum lights, before the tourists, before the glass. Her grandmother gave it to her, years ago, folded in a book of lullabies. The back of the photo says, in faded ink, "She watched me dream." Layla leaves it on the stone and walks away. Above her, the wind sighs. Back in Vienna, a curator named Matthias begins a restoration report. He's been tasked with examining the statue's base, a long overdue preservation effort funded by a private donor. He examines the gold under microscope. He tests the chemical compounds in the resin. He reviews the X-rays from 1981. But something unsettles him. The gold is fused with something else. Something organic. He writes, "Traces of collagen. Possibly contamination. But deeper layers suggest integration." Then he stops, puts down his pen, and closes the file. Because he understands what that would mean. And he is not ready to believe it. Not yet. In a quiet university archive in Izmir, a student scanning old Lydian census records uncovers a page misfiled beneath tax receipts. It is faded, frayed, nearly blank. But he adjusts the light and reads, Cycle 274. Offering received. Name Dion of House Baron. Record sealed. He frowns. Dion? He types it into a database. Nothing. But that night, as he lies in bed, he dreams of a girl made of gold, standing at the edge of a barley field. She does not speak. But her eyes burn. And somewhere deep in the museum, beneath the hum of lights and the whisper of tourists, the statue waits. Still. But not asleep. Never asleep. Gold does not breathe. But memory does. And in the hollows behind her sealed lips something stirs. Not a spirit. Not a curse. Just a story, coiled tightly in the space where a voice used to live. A story that has waited centuries to be heard. Even now, long after empires have fallen and the coins in the river have dulled with silt, her form still stands. Motionless. Silent. Golden. In a room that smells of old paper and velvet ropes, she remains, neither relic nor deity, but something more difficult. Something honest. A truth cast in metal. A girl who was never meant to be remembered, preserved by the same beauty that erased her. Around her, the world breathes on, soft and uncaring. Children are born. Markets rise. Wars begin and end and are folded into textbooks. The gods change their names. But she remains. Not for vengeance. Not for justice. But as a monument to the unbearable weight of reverence. To the cruelty of admiration. To the way we gild what we silence. In the hush of that museum room, if you linger long enough, you may feel it too, not a haunting, but a presence. Gentle. Patient. Watching. And if you close your eyes, you might even hear a voice that isn't yours. A memory older than language, whispering through the glass like wind through reeds. I remember. And in that moment, so quiet it cannot be recorded, you will realize. She has never forgotten. And she has never, ever stopped watching.